Last week we talked about how the presence of God became a cloud that guided his people to the promised land. It was in their obedience to God's guidance that they got to where they were supposed to be. This week we're going to jump ahead a few centuries and go into the story of the temple being built. Israel has now become an established nation, a nation that has a king as their sovereign. The most well-known king was King David. King David was a faithful and obedient follower of God, and because of his faithfulness and obedience to God, God anointed him and blessed his family and lineage to create a dynasty. His son, Solomon, became the king after him. It was Solomon who was commissioned to build the temple for God to dwell in. This temple was to be at the center of their capital, as a place for people to worship and a place for people to be one with God. We're going to start off our text in 1 Kings 8. And it says, "These poles were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from the outside of the holy place. And they were still there today. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. When the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord. As the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple." This text is the introduction of the ark being presented into the temple after Solomon had already built it. There's some key attributes that we notice in the building of the temple compared to the building the tabernacle back in Moses' time. When Moses built the tabernacle, he listened and obeyed to every single command of the Lord. When Solomon built the temple, there was the biggest difference that it was built not in the commands of God, but in the commands of Solomon. Both resembled the residence of God, stressing his presence as a place where God reigns and rules as king, which stressed his power and his sovereignty. And because he dwells there, it is holy, stressing God's holiness. And the temple and tabernacle is a place where God's people could approach God in worship. When Solomon created the temple in his own commandments, he mistook the actual commandments of God, and in that act of disobedience, there was a falling out between God and his temple in place. And instead of God giving him any praise, he gave him a warning. God warned Solomon that if they did not be faithful and obedient to God's commands, then he would not stay there for very long. It was in their obedience and their faithfulness that God would remain with them. As we've walked into this knowledge of how faithfulness and obedience are key aspects of how God is present with us, we want to go into our small groups and ask you these 3 questions. What is noticeable from the text and how the presence of God plays into the lives of the children of Israel in the temple? What is so significant and important to live lives of faithful obedience to God for us today? How do we make our plans according to God's commands in our lives as well today?